Hello, Don Katz and Owen Zev, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'll introduce you briefly for our viewers. Don is the founder of Audible, the most successful company in the field of audiobooks, and mainly the inventor of the experience of listening to books as we know it today. Owen is one of the prominent investors in Silicon Valley. He was an early investor in companies like House, Chag, and TripActions, but Audible was his first home run, as he calls it. And they both have an extraordinary story. Don, I'll start with you. You've been a successful journalist and writer for 20 years. I actually felt like you lived 5 different lives when I interviewed you before. And you founded Audible after the age of 40. What makes someone decide he wants to be an entrepreneur? And how crazy do you have to be to think you'll succeed?
Wow. Well, first of all, it's just great to be here. It's such an honor to be with Oren and with you, Ruti. And I apologize that watching Bauda and and Shtisel and everything over and over again doesn't make my Hebrew good enough to compete. But thanks for all the listeners in English. So yeah, it's interesting. I was actually 43. And to believe it or not, there's a lot of data that shows that 40 plus year old entrepreneurs technically are quite successful versus 20 something entrepreneurs. But my wife called it a non-toxic midlife crisis, where I had a perfectly good writing career, as you said, for 20 years. And I just got one of these ideas I couldn't shake. And I will say that I've often said that being an inquisitive journalist and writer is one of the best backgrounds for an entrepreneur you could possibly have. But most of us tend to be so anti-capitalist if we're journalists that we don't tend to think about taking these skills into business, because you have to understand how to get to the truth. You have to be persuasive. You have to get people to trust you. In my case, so often people who let me into big companies that they never even gave an interview and they'll tell me the truth. You have to have a big vision of an idea if you're a book writer to get a big advance and things like that. And then you have to, to execute it. So I've often, when I would win entrepreneurial awards and things, I always would say, there's nothing more entrepreneurial than a nonfiction storyteller in America who makes a living and has a house, because it is pretty entrepreneurial to start with. But the weird thing was that the Audible idea was supposed to be a book almost 25 years ago on digital technology. And I got that big advance and I realized I didn't want to write about it. I wanted to actually, do something. And then the vision of the possible came in, and I couldn't get off. So from 1994 to 1995, and Audible was founded in November of 1995 and commercialized its service in November of 97. I just obsessively stopped writing and started thinking about how to start a business.
So today, Audible has tens of millions of subscribers, but in 1995, before the iPhone or the broadband, how did you manage to convince investors that talking books were going to conquer the world?
Well, part of it was simply how I positioned it, and now that Oren and I have invested in many companies. We've done so many things together, seeing how little ideas become companies and the like. And one of the things I always coach in is make sure the metrics you're driving to are the ones that really make a difference. So from the beginning, I basically didn't say there was this spoken word industry that I was going to fix. That's more of the business school way of thinking about solutioning. What I said was the Department of Transportation in America would say 93 million people drive to work alone in America. And if we just get 6 or 7% of them paying us $10 a month with a fantastic listening service that's better than the radio, this is what the business would look like. Which was kind of interesting, because when Oren came into my life in 2003, he almost wasn't almost allowed to make the investment, because they did go back to that idea of an X $100 million business, and if we only got 20% of it, that's just not the way I thought about it. I thought if you change behavior and you make people, if you connect artists and artistry to human beings in a powerful way, you can create a category. And that's what happened, because the number of zeros involved were way beyond what Oren's team projected. the business would ever be. So I think part of it is just how you imagine this stuff. The other thing is that, that I was a book writer, and I understood, since I wrote about business, I kind of had virtual business school being inside these huge businesses. I was more a student of large corporations in many ways than I was understanding how to make a little company. But I knew a lot about why the publishing business, book publishing business, was so deeply inefficient, because that's how I made my living. And if you think about it, digital delivery meant, no out of stock, you'll never run out. There weren't any packaging costs, that kind of thing. So I saw this digital idea, but you have to remember there was no broadband, there was no real internet except for phone lines. It goes way back.
So you actually came to the market too early, so it's a miracle you survived.
7 years, not to put a point on it, but.
Owen, I need to ask if this was his real pitch, or he's like a winner rewriting his history.
No, word by word, word by word. And, by the time I saw it, because remember, I didn't see it at the very beginning. I saw it a few years later. When I saw it, I thought it was a no-brainer, and it didn't take, I don't think it took Don more than 10 minutes to convince me. And then it took me relatively short amount of time to convince my partners. And absolutely, word by word.
No, I've heard like the only reason you could invest in him is because your partners were on vacation.
Yeah, two of my partners who would have, I have no doubt, would have blocked it, were on vacation. Yeah, it was, the only reason it was difficult is because back then, anything that had a .com ring to it was, untouchable.
That was 2003, right?
That was 2003. And back then, by and large, the groupthink, first of all, VCs were shell-shocked from the bubble burst.
Yeah.
And you know how VCs have this groupthink, and the groupthink was that, in general, .coms, you're an idiot to believe, the story of, you were an idiot to believe everyone, we were all idiots to believe it in 99, but if you believe it in 2003, you're a clinical case, right? You should be, hospitalized. And so I think that was the main difficulty. Luckily, these two partners were on vacations, and they somehow got to approve it anyhow. So but the pitch was exactly that. And obviously, to me, back then, if you looked at it objectively, it was a no-brainer. At that point.
But at that point, it wasn't actually this digital company we know now. I think, and it's for you and for Don, this question, I think many people don't know that Audible was actually a hardware company in the beginning. Can you expand a bit on that?
So first, I do want to say, though, that what's really interesting for your listeners, I mean, you do have one of the greatest investors in Silicon Valley kind of ever on the screen with us right now. And I got to watch him become a different person. The groupthink he mentioned, he worked his way out of that to another in our lifetimes together. And it was really amazing to see how he learned to empower and trust founders, which really wasn't what venture capitalists did. They were in fact, they really were dismissive of founders with vision as being idea people, and you had to have operators and stuff. And Oren revolutionized this, and that's why he's so successful in many ways. And what also happened in that period, just worth noting, is that Israeli companies became some of the most important entrepreneurial, customer-centric whole companies, because way back when, at that period, Israeli product development almost didn't exist. It was more science. I mean, these amazing scientists were coming out of Technion and other things. And what I also saw in this period is, in Oren's success, and frankly, some of my success with him, and even my own venture fund I funded, this fund is very focused on how powerfully Israeli entrepreneurs became full products, full customer centric. So all of this is a really interesting story when you think of this time frame. But yeah, so we were kind of past being a full hardware company by the time Oren came back in 2003. But it is true that when I realized that the phone lines could handle the size of a file of a spoken word file, I called my college roommate, who was a supercomputer designer and one of my many contacts for my column in Esquire magazine on technology I was writing at the time. And I remember saying to him, we have to figure out a way to liberate the signal from the phone, because it was literally just a phone line. Because we would need to be able to get it into people's cars and into my belly pack when I jog, 5 miles every day and things like that. And then we went into brainstorm mode, and there were all these changes back in 1994, 95 of miniaturization of components. Digital signal processors were coming out. Flash memory was a brand new idea. And we literally got together with some friends of his just on the idea, and designed this idea of a digital audio player 5 years before the iPod came out. And the weird story just is that the first vision of it was just kind of funny, was a solid state minute cassette, that was on the patent was on my credit card because I didn't have the money, $14,000, I remember. And the idea was you would load this up with digital content on your, on your phone. The idea of putting it to the web and PC hadn't come yet, and you take it into your car, put it into your tape bed, and it would turn the electromechanical controls into digital controls and play. It actually got manufactured at a point we were almost going out of business of the many near-death experience as a beautiful solid state silver kind of device. But the joke is that within a few years, there weren't any more cassette tape beds in people's cars. So it was almost a dead on arrival idea from the beginning.
So you needed to invent yourself like a couple of times during the time.
Yeah, and also we had to invent how to download. There was no real protocol for that. How to protect intellectual property. We actually had encrypted downloads before there's a word digital rights management, DRM, which came like 5 years later. No, we were weirdly early with these ideas, and the device we invented, the Audible mobile player, is in the American Smithsonian Institute as the first network digital audio player.
So you were mentioning a patent, and once when I spoke with Owen, he told me that there was a deal with the patent, and Microsoft actually owned 27% of the company when he got in, and he made like a deal with them in order to make it happen. Owen, can you expand on that or walk me through the business environment at the time?
Yeah, so as I said, the business environment was in general that VCs were shell-shocked, and and it was very difficult to get funding for .com. When I saw Audible, when I met with Don, it was actually what we call today product market fit. Back then, the expression doesn't exist, but it was clear to me that they've already accomplished it. And initially, the idea was that I would put some money into the company. And then Don came up with the idea. Microsoft had a big chunk of the company, but the bigger problem was that it was in the form of a pretty toxic instrument called redeemable preferred shares. And Don had the idea that if I bought Microsoft shares and I could give up this toxic feature, that would help the company a lot. And he had the perfect idea how to get Microsoft to sell the shares from me. Microsoft didn't care at this point about their investments in general, in their startup investments, including Audible. And but they were really interested in some IP, and I even forget exactly what kind of IP exactly, but Audible had such fundamental basic, IP because they were so early to the internet, things that covered well beyond spoken word, like just a general concept of downloads and stuff like that. And they were interested in IP that Audible had. So basically, it was a very clever, maybe one of the cleverest deals I've ever done in my life, of a three-way deal where everyone got what they wanted. Don got, I want to flatter myself and say better partner, but at the very least, he got better paper than he had before, and money into the company. Microsoft got some IP that they wanted, and they didn't care about the investment anyway. And I got a great deal. So it was like it was very great. I paid. I put $4 million into the company and $7 million to buy Microsoft stake. So in total, I paid 11 million and I got 40% of the company. It was totally a great deal. And it was not just in hindsight. Even when I did it, it was obvious to me that it's a great deal. You know, I was so excited about the deal. And by the way, just one anecdote. It took me 4 days. I don't know if you remember that, Dawn, but we signed a term sheet on Monday and we signed the deal on Friday. And this is unprecedented to go from a term sheet to sign deal, complex deal, you know, a pipe part, a secondary part in 4 days, because, you know, I just was so panicking not to lose it because it was so obvious to me that it's a great deal.
And how much did you get on this deal eventually?
Oh, you know, we sold in 2 tranches. Once when we took it public 15 months later, and the second part when we sold to Amazon. But in total, the 11 turned into 130 million. So it was about 12x, I think, and which again today doesn't sound like, okay, 130 million. Back then, winners were very few and far between. So that was a very big deal back then. Yeah. And it really is the deal that made me as a venture capitalist, because as a venture capitalist, you know, to really be the legitimate, like someone who is recognized as a winner or you need at least one, okay? And that was the first. Once you have the first, you can get the second, you get the third, you can get the fourth, and each time it's easier because you already have the perception that you know what you're doing and that you're locked up here, etc. So, but the first one is the hardest. And by the way, the only reason why I got this deal, I think, is because it was, you know, it was such a terrible period to raise money, and nobody else, you know, because if I had to compete with anyone, I would probably have lost, you know, because you know, I was a nobody, you know, I didn't have a pre-existing relationship with Don, you know, and he had, you know, anyway, it was.
Yeah. And younger viewers should understand that at the beginning of, in April of 2000, there were something like 1,500 public e-commerce internet companies traded on the stock market. And that by the beginning of 2003, there were around 140 left. And it's amazing how Americans are best at having no historical memory of economics. It's one of our famous things where, you know, Europeans are still scarred by things that happened in 1920. You know, so but it's just an amazing thing to think about that we made it through. It was quite a lot of battling and painful layoffs and all kinds of things, but we came out, you know, in great shape, and Oren kind of discovered us. I have to say one quick anecdote. So, you know, this idea of big companies and how they look at things and missing little company opportunities and our IP made me think that, you know, in 1997 and 98, I spent a bunch of time in Tokyo talking to the board members and the CEO of Sony and basically saying, if you take this, I don't want to be in the hardware business. I want to be in the content and software business. If you just license this and make the player for, you know, you can have 10% of the company, and you know, Sony, you invented the Walkman, you are the personal audio video, and all these guys who ran this company were there, and they passed based on the fact that they were afraid that our IP would cost them pennies on the dollar if ever there was enough bandwidth to let music and video go through the pipes. And the board members who I've known, you know, I'll call it the audible moment at Sony, when they missed their opportunity. If you think of what's happened to that company, they completely missed the digital experience. So it's one of those just little anecdotes I thought I'd bring up for anything.
Your first deal was with Steve Jobs, no? Wasn't it?
Yeah, well, so my real partner joined at the hip became Steve Jobs, who at the depths of the internet darkness, you know, in 2001 called and said, I have a secret project. And he basically said, I completely admire your technology. I said to his wife, Lorene, just recently that I wondered if Steve ever said, I admire someone else's technology other than to me. She said, no, he always said it. But no, he wanted to, he told me, we knew that the iPod was coming out. And people forget the iPod came out. It was for ripping your own CD collection. And there was no iTunes for almost 2 years. But when it came out, it was commercially worked with Audible. It was a connection very, very early. And we became the exclusive provider of their audio for many years.
So I'll fast forward to today. How does the Audible business looks now during COVID-19 when less people are on the road?
Well, it is true that, we get basically the longest amount of time per day when our millions and millions of customers listen. So it's amazing to think how many millions of people are listening right now. But it was really interesting in the time of COVID. First of all, we were able to go digital as an entire company, thousands of people in 17 global centers immediately, and we delivered digitally. But the amazing thing is we produce remotely in many ways. We have networks of actors. We've employed 20,000 different actors in the last 5 years ourselves. So we have this huge virtual production capacity, and content from movies and TV are all coming to us to put it into play as an Audible, original first. So it's been really interesting. But what's happening on the consumer side is that listening at home had been going up and up and up as a huge, along with driving and exercising anyway. And this caused it to tilt much more heavily. And don't forget, we're compatible with things like Echoes, Alexas and things. So, and then parents in huge numbers began to go to Audible because they really are concerned about how much screen time isolated kids in the time of COVID are having. So a lot of trends kind of made up for the fact that long commutes. At one point, we have really sophisticated data on this. We knew that in Italy, by about March, road traffic was 3% of what it had been the previous year on a per capita kilometers traveled basis. So it did hit us a little bit, but we're a really lucky company in so many ways between our success and being digital at this time. I mean, I have friends whose businesses just stopped. There's no revenue at all. So we're lucky.
What do you think about the common opinion is still that the supremacy of written text? How do you deal with this criticism?
Well, considering the millions of millennials, people doing their college homework, the 25 million people are listening to Audible Stories, which is a really cool free service. If any of your listeners have kids, it's in 8 languages, unfortunately not Hebrew. It's a free service. I would argue that those people wouldn't agree in the supremacy of textual culture, and that's really a powerful trend. And the truth of the matter is, I was a very literary journalist, as journalists go. And when I left the fold, I was kind of attacked, and people said that listening is cheating, like it didn't have the intellectual integrity. And of course, I would give speeches about the fact that oral culture dominated intellectual and religious and every other element of life, and that technology created print. I mean, and print really hit its high point in the 19th century, not the 20th century. And it's been kind of a long, slow decline ever since. But it clearly is. I made my living writing print, and was very much part of a magazine industry, which is obviously not been so healthy, and newspapers too, depending on the country. But I never really looked at it that way, and I knew that the emotive power of well-wrought words, well-written words, then refracted through a really powerful performance, actually had both the intellectual sophistication of, say, theater, which is clearly text plus a performance filter. I just always believed that it would be incredibly addictive, and it sure turned out to be. Now we actually have psychodynamic neuronal testing that shows that that when you listen to the same content,
I read
that. Versus reading it or watching the movie version of it, it lights up the emotive lobes of the brain in particular ways. And we always talk about. You
sponsored it, the research.
Yeah, we sponsored it, but we had nothing to do with it. If it had come out, saying it wasn't true, that would have come out too. But I'm told that this is the way verifiable research it's the University of London, so we weren't. Yeah. We weren't paying them to, suck up to us. So
we're a bit short of time. I'm sorry.
No, just the 25 million remind me, son, an anecdote, which I want to tie to a point, which the point is that we tend to grossly underestimate new markets, the magnitude of new markets. And when I wrote my memo, my end game was 1 million, and I was laughed at in this meeting, and only when I could show that even if it's only going to be $500,000 or $250,000, it's still going to be an okay little company and we're going to make money. Only that way I got it approved. Nobody, believed the million number, and now we're talking 25 million, right? And by the way, it's still growing fast, though. It's not the end at all.
Because everyone is stuck in traffic.
But back then there was the same traffic and the same 100 million people. It's just people have hard time imagining that, again, because what Don said before. At the time, the whole market was at 800 million. And the idea that once you change the experience, the market is not a finite thing. It's or constant. The market changes based on the experience, because many more people want to experience it when it's a good experience. When it's a crappy experience, it's a small market. But when you change the experience and you change it dramatically, then you're not limited to the current market. The market can be, a lot bigger, or like 100 times bigger. So it's a great example how we all underestimated. I underestimated it, but my partners, didn't even believe my numbers, right? So anyway, I think it's a good anecdote to remember to what extent we sometimes underestimate.
It's a good point. And might as well just say, too, that the 25 is way short of what the numbers are, just people paying us. So it's quite large. And the growth is really substantial, partially because it's still seen, and Ruti, I think your comments about textual culture indicated, it's still converting people by the day at rates no media company's growth, has ever seen. And then you add in, the free versions like podcasting or the ad-supported versions. It's a massive, turn to the audio. I mean, one of our taglines is we invented we started the audio revolution, and it really is an audio kind of revolution that's across all these different, platforms. And it's like Oren says, it's just, what the point is, we were right, and but the truth is, a lot of people didn't believe in it, and we were right, and I just think that's again why he's so successful now, because if you bet on a founder being right rather than some external person who went to business school and actually only is able to think in terms of solving the customer problem, because that's about as creative as people are taught in an MBA program, you're not going to imagine the possible of creating an entire category.
We're a bit short on time, so Don, you're a very opinionated manager with an orderly agenda. You relocated your headquarters to Newark. You pay rent to employees who choose to live in the city. You have some side activities you've mentioned earlier with the investment fund, and I'll let you expand on that for a minute. But then my next question would be, Audible is a subsidiary of Amazon right now. To what extent do you have to report to Bezos? Okay,
so good. I really appreciate the question. So first of all, if particularly since some amazing entrepreneurs are listening because of your following and everything, I do recommend you look at Newark Venture Partners, which I founded, and it's become a very successful urban venture fund and a really progressive model. 10,000 companies from around the world, including a lot of Israeli companies, either have or have tried to get in. It's on the upside metrics. It's 76 different companies kind of made the cut. It has a fantastic labs program. But the idea is by planting little Audibles in a city that we moved to in 2007, which is Newark, New Jersey, which in the American context is thought to be one of the most historically damaged inner city environments with it's basically a Black and Latino city. It's right next to New York. It's an amazing cultural mecca. It was once rich. And so we dedicated ourselves to moving into this city and literally addressing structural inequality as a company, not just making our culture nice and you give money to charities and things like that. We literally moved into this inner city. We've grown almost 2,000 jobs there. And now we've tried to plant little Audibles through this venture fund, and 20 are ready to come back after COVID and go from 10 to hopefully hundreds, if not thousands. So it's a real kind of success. And the truth is, the rest of your questions, I mean, there's so many other things we do that's made our culture so rich. And mostly people want to work for Audible because of the way we've taken on this idea of pursuing meaning as a company in ways that transcend what we do. And because usually that last part means it's all about top line and bottom line, and that's your measure of success. And I just never have seen things that way from my journalism days kind of forward. And it's really been, what you're saying too is that we're thought to be one of the more successful subsidiaries. I mean, when people are always studying it, and if I give tech conferences, it's like, because we have an independent culture, business model, and brand. And that was kind of the deal with Jeff Bezos, who I knew from 1996 onwards. We compared notes because before Oren came in, Kleiner Perkins, a famous venture fund, was one of our original investors, and they had this concept of karetsu from the Japanese, bundling of companies. And so I went up and met Jeff, and we compared notes way back when. So it was 2008, the year after we moved to Newark, that I really tired of being a public company CEO. And part of this has been, some companies should be a public company. Some companies, frankly, just, shouldn't. And I just found myself so distracted by the financial class versus my life was to wake up in the morning thinking about directly connecting to writers, actors, customers, and employees. I just had trouble, because basically in 2008, what those investors wanted from our stock was volatility. I mean, so this is, talk about another crazy period of time. And I thought, I'm going to deliver them volatility. So we went in and became a subsidiary. And so Jeff and it's not the reporting. I had a big debate with him just the other day. It's a really smart person who has incredible vision, who I respect, and we learn from them. But having access to almost every customer in the world who has a credit card because of our business relationship, inventing stuff with Amazon, because speech science alone, you can't believe how deep they are in that. So there's so many great synergies about it. So nothing's perfect, but we've been, and Newark Venture Partners, Amazon and Audible in the NVP2, we just put $20 million into it together. So, it's a best of all worlds. Not everybody gets bought by Amazon is going to have that freedom, but we kind of earned it by being a pretty sophisticated company and culture and worthy of being independent.
Thank you. So I have 2 more questions for both of you. One is, can you each share one secret for being productive? Owen, go first.
Yeah, I think that as companies grow, they typically focus more and more on processes and stuff. And I think that if you have, as a company, a culture of ownership, and thanks to this culture, you can trust people to make the right decisions, and you don't have a culture of blame either. So it's okay to make a mistake. I think that you can be so much more productive as a company because, people have ownerships and they make decisions. Sometimes they'll be wrong. Many times they'll be right, as opposed to get into this mode of analysis paralysis and, people are just trying to make the decisions that it will not get them in trouble. So I think that's the best tip for companies that I can think of.
It's a good one. Yeah, well, I could be a little smart and just say, use your downtime when your eyes are busy to listen to Audible. You'll be much more successful at anything you do. It's amazing how many people when they were driving to work, they literally use Audible because they think they're getting an edge on the person in the next cube, or they're getting because you're using all this time that otherwise your eyes are busy, you can't be reading. So I think there's that part of it. But I think echoing with Oren, it's like you want to work backwards from a big vision of the possible and keep your eyes on the ultimate goal and celebrate the steps along the way that get you to that goal. And that will keep you, short of distraction. Again, for your listeners, I finally sat down in 2017 and wrote the Audible People Principles. And you can find it easily at Audible or on the web. But I kind of put in there just about everything I've learned that I often convey as to why you can have this kind of success if you don't, again, get mired in process. There's some really interesting stuff put out by a great Bain and company, the head of strategy, Jimmy Allen, called Founder's Mentality, which is also worth looking at, particularly if you're an entrepreneur who's comes from a big company background. And it's a really sophisticated analysis of how scale almost inherently brings companies down to single digit growth. And it's because it's just like Oren says, they get mired in process, they lose and it calls it founder's mentality because it's the founder's fiery ideation, you know, that is kind of lost in process and professional management. And that's why, you know, most companies at scale just, you know, either stop growing or worse, you know, dig their own graves.
I end most of my interviews with the question, what book did you just finish reading? And I think in this time it's safer to ask, what book did you just finish listening to?
Well, our customers tend to mostly say they read a book. They don't even think about it.
Yeah, I know.
Anymore. They just think it's it. So no Audible original, the American comedian Kevin Hart did a pure original called The Decision, which, I mean, this guy's street wisdom and understanding and heart, and it's hysterically funny. So that one's really good. And another, James Taylor, the great musician, did an Audible original in 90 minutes. So it wasn't reading, it's listening. That is really an incredible, deep story, punctuated with music. And that one's free to anybody. It's called Break Shot. So those are two I just finished.
Yeah, the last one I read on Audible was Bad Blood, about Elizabeth Holmes. And to me, it was just fascinating because many of the things she did, many companies do in the Silicon Valley, but she just took it to an extreme and crossed the lines. And, you know, it just brought home how dangerous those practices can be once you cross some kind of a line, which is not always clear. So I read or listened to it like a thriller. I mean, I would stay in the car. Like I would get to a place and I would just stay in the car just to get another few minutes. So anyway, I read it as a thriller.
I read it as well in Audible, in this book.
Yeah. So it's something way back when I thought I knew we were going to be more successful than people thought. There were discussion groups, the early like CompuServe discussion groups about people changing their jobs to have longer commutes to listen to Audible. And discussions like, how long have you ever stayed in a parking lot to finish, somebody reading a chapter? And I kind of knew, like, if that's the habituation factor, because that's really what you want. You want to habituate people to anything in a subscription, experience, and certainly in a content experience. And so far we've been lucky to, earn, so many people's time.
It was really interesting, and thank you so much again. And this is not the end. We have another session straight ahead of us of Q&A when Owen and Don will answer any question that you guys in the audience have. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Ruthie. Bye, Oren.
Bye.